let's begin. As you all know, for any sort of nutritional condition, or sorry, metabolic condition, nutrition is just absolutely vital in the management. We know that nutrition is vital in all areas of life, in terms of disease progression, in terms of comorbidities, in terms of longevity. As you probably all are aware, though, there's limited research into the nutritional effects and also benefits of you know, the effect on mitochondrial disorders. But we know there are certainly some things that have proven effective in some patient groups. There isn't a single treatment from a nutrition perspective for mitochondrial disorders, and we do tailor each individual person's treatment regimen to their disease progression. We know that lifestyle changes themselves can be an effective treatment, and also done in concert with the medical treatment and other various modalities. So that so-called Mito cocktail that some people will be having can certainly be supported with good nutritional practices. And some of you may be familiar with the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. It's the newest, I suppose, iteration of the healthy pyramid. Some of you back in the day would remember the healthy pyramid. We now have a healthy plate, and the idea that a plate is a little bit more representative of the proportions that we eat. So you can see on our Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, really half our plate should be filled with fruits and vegetables, probably about a quarter should be filled with protein foods, and another quarter with healthy carbohydrates. And those discretionary food items that we all know and love so well are the small component of our intake down the bottom corner. Next slide, Tim, please.
So is that the slide you wanted?
Perfect, yeah. Thank you. So energy losses, you may have heard energy in equals energy out, and a calorie is a calorie is a calorie. And in most instances, if we're having too much energy taken in for our energy requirements, there'll be subsequent weight gain. If we don't have enough energy in to counter our energy requirements, there'll be weight loss. So we need to find a balance between taking in good calorie to match our energy output. So we know that our very important muscles in our body, our brain, our heart, our skeletal muscles, our eye muscles, and certainly our kidneys can malfunction because they run out of energy, and the inability for people with mitochondrial disorders to produce that energy they need. There's no real way to combat this type of energy loss directly. It's probably a combination of all these factors: good nutrition, adequate rest, staying away from any sort of physical stress, so excessive exercise when it's very hot, change in temperatures, for example, and avoiding emotional stresses. Now, all of this obviously is a lot more easily said than done, but there are certainly some strategies we can do to ensure that our energy loss isn't as severe as it could be. So effectiveness of our nutritional we certainly know that it varies from person to person, and also depends on the type and the severity of each disorder. And we know that those that have a milder form of any of the disorders will tend to respond to our nutritional interventions a little bit better. We know too, nutritional treatment won't necessarily reverse any damage that may have already been sustained, particularly in the brain, but we know that it can certainly halt further damage, or even certainly slow it. We know that the treatment might be a vast improvement. It can take many weeks, even months to see a change, so it's certainly worth persisting with any sort of intervention. And we know too that there's just certainly some people that don't see a benefit from interventions. Of course, the barriers to effective nutritional intake, and this is not unique to people with mitochondrial disorders. This is we all have these things from time to time. So, but particularly if you're incredibly tired, if you do have either acute or chronic, so long-term muscle weakness, if you have any sort of dysmotility or dysphagia which prevents you from eating adequately or drinking adequately, symptoms like nausea and vomiting, that can certainly prevent you from taking appropriate nutrition. ataxia, where thereby you don't move correctly, or you have difficulty with moving. So the ability to prepare a meal, even shop for meals, even eat the meals can be quite limiting. Reflux, which some of you may experience, can certainly make meal times less pleasant than usual, and just low volition. And as I said, all of us can suffer this from time to time, but some people with mitochondrial disorders will never actually achieve those higher volition states. So the bottom line is just plan, plan, plan. It's so important. It's very easy for me to say, but oftentimes it's going to be your fallback will have lots of different strategies to make sure that you can achieve your nutritional intake. So use the online grocery delivery. I know there's a delay at the moment, but certainly take advantage with that. Or even meal preparation kits. So some of you may have used things like the Marley Spoon or the HelloFresh. Take advantage of those half-price deliveries, or even share it with a neighbour or friend or colleague. The other thing that is very, very useful are the frozen or the ready-to-eat meals. And gone are the days of them being like plain food. They can be quite tasty, quite nutritious, and things like the U foods or lean cuisines are actually really catering for a lean, high protein, low GI, sort of reasonable carbohydrate intake. And they don't need to be expensive. You can get U foods very cheaply at Aldi. You can wait till the lean cuisines are on special, or the 2-for-1 deals, and they're just a really handy thing to have in the freezer. It takes 4 minutes in the microwave, and there can be a really cost-effective way for you to eat. Making sure there's lots of non-perishable nutritious snacks that you have on hand. So things like popcorn, crackers, even Jatz crackers, lots of nuts, dried fruits. So these low glycemic index, high energy foods that you can just have on hand, you're not going to run out of. Really important, and you're taking those with you. Some people like to use nutrition supplements or meal replacements. So they could be specialized formulas. They could be as simple as a chocolate milk or an up and go or something like that. And it's just a good thing to have on hand, even in the fridge or even in your pantry. When you just don't feel like having anything to eat, you're feeling very tired, but you've got something that you can quite easily have, because more often than not, if you're hungry, it's the end of a busy day, you're feeling very tired, you might order a pizza and you eat it and you don't actually feel fantastic afterwards. So you're better off having those on-hand meal replacements there. If you are getting out and about with, extra activity, or if you're exercising, make sure you're having lots of fluid and lots of those good energy snacks to have, certainly before and after. Some people like to use blended foods. So there's a move more and more towards some of our younger families using blended foods with small children. Some of our adults like to use blended soups or even blended meals. Back in the day when I was at university, we all attempted blended lasagnas and blended Big Macs even. And whilst it mightn't have been the most nutritious food, it was pretty tasty. And it was quite a reasonable way to consume calories. If someone offers you help, accept it. So if someone says, let me know if there's anything I can do, let them know. Get them to make you a meal. Get them to go to the grocery store for you. That's where people ask and they actually want to do things. Don't be afraid to accept those offers of help. Some people will, I know some of our younger families, when it comes time for children's birthday parties or Christmases and things, in lieu of presents, people will make a donation into a bank account. And some of our families have purchased, say, a deep freeze for those meals that they prepare in advance. Some people have purchased specialised blenders. Some people have purchased different, meal preparation appliances, which has just been a really useful thing for these families in order to stay prepared. The other thing is, don't ever be afraid to take the lift. Don't ever be afraid to use any devices that's going to help you conserve energy, because that's hugely important, that you're not using up that energy and therefore your inability to keep that nutrition up. So I've just listed here on this page some websites you may find helpful. The first one, and they're Australian websites, which is good, or 3 out of 4 of them are Australian websites. the bulk recipes where you can make nutritious meals in big amounts that are freezable, and they're actually reasonably budget friendly as well, which is really, really handy. There's a Meals for One, and this comes from England, but it's still a very, very helpful resource to have. So if there is something that you're just wanting to prepare, especially for yourself. One-handed cooks. This was actually a resource developed for people with small children, so they could hold a child and cook at the same time, but they're actually really useful for people who mightn't be as nimble in the kitchen as others. And again, they're reasonably budget friendly as well. And cooking from the pantry is a really, really handy resource. This allows you to do exactly what it says, so you don't necessarily need those fresh items that expire reasonably quickly, or things that you may need to get to the supermarket to buy. So that's a really, really handy resource. Some of our other families too will often cook in bulk and then share their meals, which is a nice way to manage. Just so for those of you, I've got some people in my household who don't like to eat the same meal several nights in a row, but it might be something that you can do with friends or colleagues or family, where you can cook in bulk and then swap the meals around to keep the variety there. So calories, or kilojoules as they're often known, calories is our measure of energy in our food. So I often say to people, it's like putting petrol in your car. And children, and also certainly young people and adults with mitochondrial disorders, often have altered energy requirements, be they very, very high or very, very low when compared with their peers. And in some instances, as I mentioned earlier, that having a really good calorie intake has been shown to improve some outcomes in children. So we want to make every mouthful count. So those more energy dense foods. Now, we're certainly not discounting the importance of, say, fruits and vegetables or lean proteins, but if you are having those foods, adding calories to them like cheese or cream or butter or oil or avocado or a nut spread, adding fat or protein to foods. The advantage of this is that it also improves the taste, but also improves the texture of some of the foods, which can be quite useful for people with mitochondrial disorders. So making sure you're pairing, say, a vegetable with a protein food. If you're using a fruit with milk or yogurt, for example, in a smoothie. Some people like to use very novel, the sweet and the savoury, so cheese and apple, or even, the good old peanut butter on celery are quite useful ways to get certainly both the vitamins and minerals and benefits of fruits and vegetables, but with the added nutrition. Empty calories. Now, the empty calories, we often refer to things that provide, say, a reasonable amount of calorie without a lot of other nutrition. And by that I mean, so things that just say are very, very high in sugar, but don't offer, say, any other vitamins and minerals. So specifically things like soft drinks, cordials, juice, for example, energy drinks. Probably energy drinks have been thought to be a go-to for people with poor energy sources, but we know those sorts of things just have the tendency to provide those calories that either can take the place of more nutritious food or actually increase weight gain in some people without providing any a benefit like a vitamin, mineral, etc. Some people like to use oral nutrition supplements, as I mentioned earlier, things that are commercially available, say like Sustagen, for example, but some things can come from your healthcare provider. So there are specialised high energy drinks that can serve as meal replacements. And if you're interested in something like that, then talking to your healthcare team would be quite useful. And some of our younger children, some of our adolescents will use enteral feeding, which is a more aggressive type of feeding, where children are fed, or young people are fed with a tube. And that's when they just can't get the calories they need orally. They get very, very tired when they're eating. So we often use feeding at night, where children, while they're asleep, get fed, and then during the day, we can then make the most of their oral intake. And certainly that's a calorie provision strategy, but it's also, and the more and more I practice, I'm very mindful of the social and emotional aspects of eating. So you know, we want to lessen or not medicalise treatment as much as possible. We already take a lot of choice away from children and young people and adults. We want to make people have some choice in their treatment. We want them to enjoy eating. You know, a lot of us go out to dinner, you know, not to get our vitamins and minerals, but to have a lovely time. So we want to make eating still an enjoyable and social part of people's lives as well. So it's trying to find that nice balance between the physiological energy provision as well as those social aspects of eating. Protein is one of what we call macronutrients. So energy or calories is made up of three main nutrients, macronutrients, so protein, fat and carbohydrate. Another significant source of nutrient, technically speaking, is alcohol. We won't talk about that too much today. So our protein, it's our stored energy, and it's stored in the muscle, and it's needed for our strength. Carbohydrates compared with protein are just often more easily eaten and more appealing to children, but we know that giving too much carbohydrate can have a negative effect on mitochondria. So as I'm sure you're all well aware, mitochondria will break down the glucose that comes from carbohydrate digestion, which gives energy to each and every cell in our body that we can use. We know that if there's too much glucose, the mitochondrial cells don't work as well. And protein is effective in preventing or minimizing those very, very high peaks in glucose that happen in our blood when we eat very, very high carbohydrate foods. So that's where having a combination of those slower acting carbohydrates with our higher protein diet comes into play. And I'll talk about the GI shortly. It's important to include lean protein at each meal and snack. And the good news is most people enjoy protein food. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the good sources of protein. So meat, beef, chicken, for example, and fish are really excellent sources of protein, excellent sources of iron and zinc and B12, which are hugely important for the function of our muscles. Dairy foods, and you can certainly choose lean and low fat and no fat dairy foods. So milk, yogurt, cheese, custard. Certainly there are dairy alternatives like soy products that can provide just as much nutrition. Just be cautious if you are using other alternatives like, say, nut milks or say oat milks or rice milks, for example, because they don't always offer the same nutritional value as the dairy counterpart. Nuts and beans and legumes. I know beans and legumes aren't always appealing, but there are some really novel ways that you can use beans and legumes in food. They're really cheap. They bulk up foods. They maintain your satiety, which means you feel fuller for longer, which is hugely important if you're thinking about weight management. And a lot of the time, if, you know, particularly for young children or husbands for that matter, when you blend kidney beans into mince, they don't actually even know that they're there. Eggs are another excellent source of protein, a really, really good source of nutrition. I know for many years the media have been very fond of eggs, or eggs have been the enemy, but we know that they're an incredibly useful source of nutrition. They have great protein. They don't push cholesterol levels high as what was once thought. So they can be a really useful thing. Again, excellent for satiety, which means making you feel fuller for longer. So where you can use nut spreads on things, peanut butter, some of you may have tried different nut butters. So almond butter actually tastes, I think, a little bit like white chocolate. Cashew paste, those sorts of really fantastic spreads you can use on breads and crackers as an alternative to other things. As I mentioned, beans can be mixed through meat or vegetable dishes, either whole or blended. If you are looking for calories in your milk drinks or meal replacements, using ice cream or yogurt or even gelati mixed into your milk drinks. Eggs at brekkie are always a winner, and some families will boil their 12 eggs and just have them in the fridge just as like a snack ready to go, which is a really, really great way to have an on-the-go brekkie. Protein on your sandwich, sometimes 2 serves of protein on your sandwich is a great way to get that nutrition in. cheese through hot foods. Not only is it a great way to get calories, but it's a really tasty way to get calories. Hummus or tahini, which people probably think is a little bit fancy, but it's a really easy and tasty way for young children. Kids love to dip, so they'll dip their vegetables or crackers into foods like that, or you can mix it through salads or drizzle over the top of roasted vegetables. And some people, and it's a really cheap, easy way to do it, mixing skim milk powder, even regular milk powder through milk, for example, and that just gives you some ready high protein, high energy milk that just can be used with every single food item. So our carbohydrate foods, we know they're carried in the blood, stored in the liver and needed for energy. The big thing that we're going to talk about is our high versus our low glycemic index foods. So high GI foods, when you eat those foods, they tend to have a big peak in your blood glucose levels and then quickly drop. So you could have very, very quick drops in your energy levels versus low glycemic index foods, which have a nice slow rise on your blood glucose levels and then a very, very slow drop. So you feel fuller for longer. So think the less processed a food and the more like the natural product the food looks. So think a piece of wheat or a piece of rice and, you know, wheat bix versus rice bubbles or cocoa pops. The thing that looks more like the natural product, the better it is for you, and the lower the GI. So making some simple substitutions. I mean, a lot of kids and even older people don't like whole grain bread, but there are low GI, high fiber versions of bread that are very acceptable. Pumpkin for sweet potato is a simple one. Even brown rice for white rice. A lot of people will turn their nose. Sorry, white rice for brown rice. A lot of people won't be terribly fond of that, but it's actually a really simple substitution, particularly when it's covered in curry or something like that. We know hydration is vital for cell health. We're all about 70% water, and even a small change in the fluid volume in our body can be quite detrimental, particularly for people with mitochondrial disorders. And of course, it's very tricky. I know if there's a physical problem with actually taking in fluids, some people with mitochondrial disorders have absolutely huge fluid requirements. And then the other thing is if you are having trouble getting up or down, it's often just a bit of a pain to have to keep getting up and going to the toilet all the time, but it's such an important thing to do, and it's also perhaps another way to have that incidental exercise going on. Some people, just a very, very simple way to make sure you're getting adequate hydration is looking at the colour of your urine, but just making sure that you're not confusing dehydration with the B vitamins that might be in your Mito cocktail. Some people will fill their container at the start of the day and make sure they get through it by the end of the day. It doesn't just have to be water. I know some people who say, if I have to have another drink of water, I'll go crazy. Use fruit juice or diet cordial as a way to flavour it. Soda streams are a really easy way. Wax some bubbles in it, put a little umbrella in it, looks pretty fancy. The other thing, as I mentioned, I'm just conscious of the time, our vitamins and cofactors. We know that there's two functions that these supplements can provide, so that possibly there's some stability or enhancement of enzyme function, which can improve energy production, and also antioxidants. So antioxidants, I'm sure you've all heard of that. They're involved in the prevention of cellular damage. So that can have some effects in slowing the progression of the disease. So vitamin E, coenzyme Q10, lipoic acid, vitamin C, vitamin K, and riboflavin, which is a B vitamin, and creatine, arginine, carnitine, thiamine, folinic acid. Those sorts of supplements have been used successfully in some mitochondrial disorders, but it's hugely important that you're talking to your physician, your healthcare provider, before you're starting anything. Natural doesn't always mean safe. Snake venom's natural. So just be really careful with what you're buying and make sure you check in. Any health professional won't dismiss you. They'll take it into consideration, because it's completely understandable that you'll be wanting to try as much as you can to promote energy levels. I'm sure it's a very dietitian-y thing to say, but small frequent meals is a very good way to combat a poor appetite. It's also a very good way to combat eating too much as well. So if you're thinking about weight management, if you are eating, try to avoid having fluid before the meals, because that's just going to fill you up. And certainly those big quantities of difficult to digest protein are often better when they're dished up several times throughout the day. Fat added to food can slow down your digestion, So that can either be a good or a bad thing. If you have reflux or if you have diarrhea, that's a good thing. If you've got some gastric emptying problems, lower fat can be helpful. Again, that's something to talk to your healthcare professional about. So there are some medications that have been useful in combating poor appetites. And as I mentioned earlier, those enteral feeds can be quite useful as well. I'll just quickly touch on thickened foods or texture modified foods. So some people will benefit, particularly if they're having difficulty having lots of fluid, from having some texture modified fluids. And I assure you, I've had thickened champagne, and while the bubbles don't bubble as well, it certainly gives you the same sort of hit. So they can be quite a useful thing in order to manage your hydration. And just finally, the ketogenic diet, it's very popular in social and online forums as a treatment for anything really. But from a mitochondrial point of view, the ketogenic diet, there is a small body of evidence that shows that it can be effective to help with the energy provision in some mitochondrial disorders. But that's something that you'll need to discuss in great detail with your healthcare team. The diet needs to be implemented and managed really, really carefully if that's something that is going to be suitable for you. Activity is a hugely important thing, doing as much as you can when you're well, maintaining energy when you can. Again, you know, that little fund of money that I was talking about that some families use have put towards, say, exercise classes or training classes, particularly water aerobics or things like that. So that can be incredibly useful for building muscle, promoting appetite and also controlling weight gain. I completely understand that it's a very difficult thing to do when you're fatigued, but if you can manage it and get some assistance with doing it, then it's going to make a huge difference to your feeling, your quality of life and volition as well.